Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. If you spent any time on YouTube as a miniature painter, you will have seen hundreds of videos talking about Slapchop. So today, I'm going to take a look at Slapchop and see how can we use this for painting our miniatures to get great results really quickly and easily. So the first thing I've done is I've primed my model black, as this will give us the darkest colours for the effect we're going to be looking for. And first of all, I'm coming in with some Mechanicus Standard Grey, and I'm going to dry brush this very heavily all over the model. So I just want to leave the Chaos Black spray showing in the darkest and deepest recesses of the model. I want to apply this overbrush of Mechanicus Standard Grey to pick out all of the flat, smooth and raised areas of the model with some Mechanicus Standard Grey. Mechanicus Standard Grey applied, you can see we've left the Chaos Black showing in all the darkest and deepest areas, but we've caught all of the other surfaces with this dry brush of Mechanicus Standard Grey. So now with some Dawnstone, I'm doing much the same, but coming in ever so slightly lighter, so I just leave a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey showing through, but catching all of those same areas with some Dawnstone. Slapchop works best on models with a lot of texture. It doesn't work so well on flat, smooth surfaces because of the way contrast paints work. So for this video here, I'm using this Hobbit model. It's got a lot of detail, a lot of texture, so hopefully the Slapchop method should work really well. So make sure you apply this dry brush of Dawnstone all over the model, leaving a little bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey showing through. See that finished effect, as we can still see a little bit of Chaos Black in the deepest areas. We're getting a transition from the darker grey up to the lighter grey. Now there's just one final dry brush left to apply. This is with some White Scar. I'm going to apply this from a top-down motion, so it will catch all of the most raised areas, but leaving a lot of the other colours showing through in the deeper areas. We're just catching the areas that the light will catch by applying this top-down dry brush of White Scar. With Slapchop, a lot of the work is done at the start of the process. Getting this Zenithal gradient onto your model obviously takes a lot longer than just applying a prime. This is an old technique called underpainting, and it does give great results for painting off of, especially with thin contrast paints, or if you were to glaze over the top. And here we can see the effect I've built up on this Hobbit model. You can see the transitions from dark to light. So now it's time to start applying some paints. The first contrast paint I'm applying is Talosar Blue. And now I'm going to apply this to the jacket on this model. So because of the way contrast paints are, I'm going to be really careful to make sure I don't get this over anything that I don't want to be Talosar Blue. So this is one of the things I have with the name of Slapchop. You don't want to be slapping these paints on. It actually takes quite a lot of control to ensure that you're just getting these contrast paints where we want them, because any mistakes can be really hard to tidy up. So I'm being careful with my brush strokes, making sure I'm just moving this contrast paint around, but only getting it on the jacket to this Hobbit. And once that Talosar Blue's dried, you can see how we've got that dark to light gradient still showing through the contrast paint. So now it's time to move on and pick out other details on this model. So with some orc flesh here, I'm going to paint the sleeves. Once again, really careful, so when I get to his hands, I'm making sure I don't get any of this over the areas I'm going to paint for skin. I'm just going to catch the sleeves with this orc flesh. Also, obviously, been really careful around the Talosar Blue I've already painted. You can control your Slapchop and how bright the colours are going to be at the end by how bright you apply that undershading Zenithal. The more white you apply, the brighter the end result will be. The more greys or dark colours, the darker the final tone will be. So you can see how the green is also showing a transition from dark to light. Where it's over the white, it's very thin, and where it's into those recesses, it's a lot darker, adding shadows. So I'm coming with some black Templar contrast paint. For this, I'm going to paint the trousers and any hair on this hobbit. So once again, being really careful with this. As it's black, I really don't want to get this over anything that I don't want to be black at the end, because it'll be really hard to paint over. So I'm carefully picking out the trousers to this hobbit. Just making sure I coat all of them with a single coat of black Templar contrast paint. And I'm also going to pick out the hair, so on the feet and around the head of the hobbit as well. Once again, being careful to only get this where I want it. As that black's dried, you can see how we've got the highlights are showing slightly on the raised areas, and it's darker in the recesses. But we will do some work later on to tidy that up. So now I'm coming with a little bit of the skeleton horde contrast paint. I'm going to paint the pouch that he's got on his waist. This is a very thin contrast paint, lets a lot of the other colours underneath show through. So if you've gone too heavy with the white, this colour is really going to show up white rather than a browny colour. You can see how that skeleton horde's given a slight leather appearance to that pouch on its waist. So I'm coming in with some Iron Jaws yellow, and I'm going to paint the little tie around his neck. Yellow is quite good for this method because it does end up being quite bright and vibrant. But as with everything, I've got to be really careful around the areas. I'm going to be painting skin later, making sure I just catch this tie with the yellow. See, that little pop of yellow really adds interest to the model. There's just a few details left to pick out on this hobbit now. With some snakebite leather, I'm going to paint his hat. I find snakebite leather does give quite a good leather appearance, especially if you get a good Zenithal underneath. It really plays into those transitions from dark to light, so you really want to make sure you do have that gradient, because otherwise you can end up with some quite flat colour and just a bit of pooling in the recess. So with the hat painted, only contrast paint left to apply now. It's going to be for the skin. For the skin, I'm going to be using Dark Oath Flesh. Can also use Guilliman Flesh if you have it. I find the skin colours are all very washy. They're more stain rather than paint. But they do obviously allow the colours underneath to show through. So all of that underpainting work pays out, and you do get those gradients from dark to light on all of the areas of skin. And with the skin painted, the only thing left to do now is to paint his sword, which without any metallic contrast paints, I'm just going to paint this using regular paint. So we're using some lead belcher for this. We're going to catch the sword in his hand with a couple of layers of lead belcher. I think the army painter has some of their speed paints, which are designed to be metallics, but I find for metal items, it's much easier to just use a regular paint, as I have done here. So for that sword, I will have to come in and shade it now, just to tie it in with the rest of the model. So I'll be doing that with a little bit of Nuln Oil. I'm just going to apply this all over the lead belch we just painted. So I'm just catching this with a quick shade of Nuln Oil.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
And so after all those contrast paints and that shade has dried, you can see we do have the detailing, shading, and to a certain degree highlights on the model. I'm going to push these to the next level, so I'm coming with some Bugman's Glow first. And with this, on all the sharpest points of the skin, I'm just catching this with a really thin edge highlight of Bugman's Glow. That will help make that skin read a little bit more like flesh, as well as pushing the highlights on all of the raised details. So I'm going to catch obviously all the details on his face and his hands and his feet as well, catching any of the raised details with a little bit of Bugman's Glow. I find that really makes that skin read a little bit better, but I'm still leaving the contrast paint in all of the recesses. I'm just applying it to the very tips of all the raised details. So I better paint the eyes on the model. So first of all, I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black. I'm going to sink this into the recesses for the eye sockets. Just very carefully here. On Hobbits, these eyes are absolutely tiny. I'm just sinking a tiny bit of Abaddon Black into those eye sockets. And then with a little bit of White Scar, just going to apply a tiny dot in the middle of the eye. Just to give the impression of the whites of a Hobbit's eyes. These are all really small, so you just very lightly catch it and just apply a small spot of White Scar. And with the eyes painted, that is the skin highlighted. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to highlight the hair on the model. For this, I'm using some Dawnstone. And I'm just going to catch the most raised points of the hair. So you can see where the contrast paints left the most raised details. So in certain bits, I'm just applying a small spot of Dawnstone. This will work with the effects of the contrast paint to really up that contrast and add just a bit more definition. With the hair highlighted, the next thing I'm going to highlight is trousers. And for this, I'm coming in with Skaven Blight Dinge. I'm just going to apply this on the very tops and all the most raised surfaces with a very thin line of Skaven Blight Dinge. This will let the natural effect of the contrast paint show through. That transition we've built up with the underpainting. But I'm just going to accentuate the highest points and up that contrast a little bit more to add some more definition to the model. Obviously, I'm leaving all of the shading from the contrast paints in those darker recesses, but just catching the lighter areas with a small additional highlight. With the black highlighted, I'm going to move on to highlighting the blue on the jacket now. For this, I'll be using Temple Guard Blue. The contrast effect is quite good on the jacket, so I'm not going to apply this everywhere, but on some of the sharpest points where I want it to be a little bit brighter, just going to catch some of these areas with a little bit of Temple Guard Blue. This will work well with the effect the contrast paint has given. Just push those highlights up one more step and really add interest and brightness to this model. With that Temple Guard Blue applied, you can see it's really made that jacket stand out and add a bit more brightness and interest to it. So I'm going to do the same for the sleeves. I'll be using Lauren Forest. And much like before, I'm just going to apply this to certain spots on the highest points. I'm really going to put this over areas that the contrast paint's pulled away so much and almost made them look white. I'm painting over these really bright areas with a bit of Lauren Forest, just to control that highlight effect a little bit more and allow me to pick out some of the details I want to be the colours that I want. So with those sleeves highlighted, we're really painting this model quite quickly. So now I'm going to highlight his hat. For this, I'll be using Baylor Brown. Works really well with the snakebite leather paint. So I'm just going to pick the very edges raised details, using the effect created by the contrast paint and just pushing it to a slightly brighter level, giving me a little bit of control where those final brighter highlights end up. With the hat highlighted, there's only one final contrast paint that I'm going to highlight on this model, and that's going to be on his necktie. For this I'll be using Avalanche Sunset, and once again just picking out the sharpest points, most raised details, and catching them with a really thin edge highlight of Avalanche Sunset. This will tie that yellow together, give a really nice effect all over his necktie. And with that tie highlighted, that's all of the contrast paints highlighted up. But now I'm going to pick out the detailing on his buttons on his jacket. For this I'll be using Retributor Armour. I'm just going to very carefully pick out these buttons with a small spot of Retributor Armour. With those buttons picked out, there's only one final thing left to highlight on this Hobbit, and that's going to be his sword. So for the sword, I'll be using Stormhose Silver. I'm just going to apply this as a thin edge highlight to the sharpest edges on his sword. For a lot of these I can use the side of my brush to get a nice smooth, even line. Just going to catch the very edges with a thin edge highlight of Stormhose Silver. And with the Stormhose Silver applied, that is how to slap chop a Hobbit model for games of Middle-earth strategy battle game. So what do you think of the technique? Do you like Slapchop? Do you think it makes painting faster? Let me know in the comments down below what you think. But thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!